All right, another video book review. This one coming with a dirtier jacket, as it is early and work is dirty. But it's about Relic of the Gods by Philip C. Quaintrell, the third in the Relic Trilogy. Yes, in the Echoes Saga 9-book series, the first of 3 trilogies done. And I am still confused on how these trilogies kind of shape up time frame wise, whether the next book starts immediately after, what's going on, because we do have a lot of immortal characters going around, elves and humans who have gained immortality and all this. So I don't know how that's going to go, but for this, the 3-book trilogy, it truly feels like a trilogy. Like all of the, not all, but let's say most, if not all, of the plot points are immediately brought to the fore in the first book, have at least been solved by this book. And, you know, stuff coming up in the second book have also been kind of finalized in this book as well, it seems. And yes, new things have opened up, like an incredible amount of things opened up on like possibilities on where he's going to go. Philip C. Quaintrell, where he's going to go with the series. But for a trilogy, it does feel pretty wrapped up. Like, if this was the end of it, and I would know, and there was nothing else after, I'd believe it. But I think Relic of the Gods is probably one of the stronger books of the trilogy, as its pacing is great. It's incredibly fast, just like the other two. You're just at a breakneck speed. But the exposition dumps that were so heavy in the first and second are kind of muted a bit because we're in the third book and a lot of the exposition has been covered. Clunkily in previous books, but it has been covered. So it's not as heavy. Yes, it's still there. In fact, that's one of my problems with all of the dialogue in this entire series, which is it seems most of it is there for exposition purposes. Exposition. 2 characters sit down and talk by a campfire. Let's talk about exposition, and then the chapter ends. You know, that kind of thing. There's no breathing, it feels. There's no room to breathe, really, between characters where you can get a lot of those character moments and you can start feeling depth for these characters. This series is not strong with that. And this book shares that with the rest of the series. It is definitely more action focused, I would say, than anything else. It's pace focused and action focused, so that yes, you don't really have time to breathe with anything that happens, and the characters don't feel much more than, kiddie pool deep. But, things are happening, and they're big things, and they're things that you're interested in, and the action is well written. So a lot can be forgiven in that aspect. But this book is the final book in the trilogy, and the big things happen, big battles, big face-offs with mages and gods and warriors and things, and you're along for the ride. It's interesting. Twists and turns happen that you sometimes see, sometimes not. Like, cool. This is, I would say, a stock standard fantasy that does it well. Right? It has a whole lot of new innovations, which I won't spoil, on like, hey, this part of the lore is very interesting and definitely breaks from traditional fantasy. However, how the characters are in the book, follow a lot of tropes, follow a lot of the fantasy tropes. But it does it so quickly that you don't need to really care that much that the trope is being followed. And, that's cool. With Of Blood and Fire, I always bring that as a standard for this. It followed the tropes so heavily, but it wasn't fast enough to where I could actually blow past it. It was like, all right, now I have to sit in this. Oh, I'm bored. That's what that was. Luckily, that's not the case. I wouldn't say this is like one of the best things I've ever read, or some of the best hard-hitting fantasy I've ever read either, because all the characters feel, skin deep, kiddie pool deep, right? You're not incredibly invested in all these characters. That's just not, it doesn't seem like that's the focus of this book. even though you see hints of it and things are happening where you're supposed to feel something. Character sacrifices, big character moments where there's weddings or, you know, things like this, friendships, bonds being made, and you're like, okay, cool. I see why that would naturally work or why that would happen, but I don't care as much. Like even with Gideon and Galanor in the first book, right, where they start as obvious enemies, and then there needs to be throughout the entire book reconciliation in ways that felt a little bit rushed at the time, even though it took entire book. But I mean, it's such a breakneck book in the first book that you're okay. I guess I accept it. Sure, time enough has passed, and they've gone through enough that maybe they're now vibing with each other. But even then, I was like, I don't know. It didn't feel natural enough, and that's just the case for most of this stuff. And the times I can see, you know, someone saying, "Oh, but there was time to breathe" with the dialogue I mentioned before. You know, all those jokes that really don't go anywhere, right? They're jokes. They're meant for levity. They're meant for you to breathe, for you to have some levity, right? None of the jokes landed. None of them were even close to funny to me, which I'm not going to take points away from the book, right? But it's not like it, even with that, they were just one or two quick little quips that almost felt like, you know, you watch any modern action comedy movie nowadays, whether it be a superhero movie or otherwise, right? Where, you know, very serious things are happening, and then the quip happens, and the quip doesn't land, and you're like, I just don't like that. It didn't work for me. Didn't need to be there. I'm more than happy to move on, right? I don't want to dwell on that. And that's kind of how all of that was. It just, he might be a really funny dude, but Quaintrell, I don't think, has mastered the art of, you know, imbuing the writing with comedy as others have and can do very well. And yeah, I would say his writing is not something to write home about, right? It's not something where I'm like, okay, let me read that again. That was beautiful. No, it's very straightforward. Things happen. It's very cut and dry. Like, there's nothing interesting about the writing, and the setting up of scenes and the lack of that, really, the setting up of settings of where characters are, of all of that, is, I think, a hindrance. Yes, the pacing is breakneck because you don't spend time seeing the hue of the water as the sun reflects off it, as the elven ships sail by, and now our characters are watching that happen, and that's 6 paragraphs gone. But, you know, some people might not like that, but it sets up a scene. It sets up the taste of the world, the vibe that the author is going for, and how, you know, how GGK would set up a scene versus how a Pierce Brown would set up a scene. They both set up scenes really well, but that flavor of the book, the flavor of the author even, and really it shades how you feel about how you view this world. It's very important in both of those books, in both those series, or both of those authors with all of their books, and it's important for every single author, right? And the lack of really effective or I missed, I think, most, if they were there, any of that setting up, I think, left me feeling like the world was a bit bland. I didn't really have a clear view on the flavor that the author was going for of this world. Like, I say flavor, like Middle-earth has a certain flavor where you feel that is unique to Middle-earth, and that's the same for most. Like, picture any fantasy that you really love in your mind, that has a certain flavor in your mind on it, and it differs from a great fantasy that you can think a second great fantasy, right? This doesn't have any flavor, and that comes with prose. I think that comes with really, really solid prose, or just any prose. Like, I don't really like Abercrombie's writing very much at all, if you've watched any of my reviews, but he's got a distinct flavor to his writing. Like, it's very specific, and people love that about him, and I can say, like, that's an enjoyable part of Abercrombie, is the flavor of his writing, and this book doesn't have much of it. And a book that I'm reading now, which is Legend by David Gimel, is a fast-paced, action-packed, fantasy, but there's character to the, maybe I shouldn't use character because the characters in that book anyways, but is separate, but the flavor set up by the prose is very distinctive by David Gemmell. Like it feels a cut above the rest of something like this, like a Legend, like, Larry Correa, Son of the Black Sword, this action-packed, quick fantasy. Legend feels above it, and I'll get more into it because the prose is so strong by David Gemmell. There is the character descriptions, the setting descriptions, the scene setups. That matters more than I would imagine, and it didn't really hit as hard on me, realizing that until, I missed it. But with Relic of the Gods, it really does fine. All of these books are passable and really good and fast-paced, and you can just fly through these books. The characters are acceptable. You're not going to feel anything crazy emotionally with these books, but, it's popcorn fantasy. That's how I think of it when I describe it to myself. Whenever I do that, which is not incredibly often, but I like to think, all right, what am I thinking about this book? And all of them have been popcorn fantasy. And this book has been the best of them, I think. The setup in the first book was really good and gets you hooked, but then, you're kind of along for an interesting ride, but nothing that'll make you emotionally crazily invested with it. With this third book, it is incredibly action-packed, and there is a battle scene, a siege in it that lasts a very long time, that is like an incredibly perfect combination of Minas Tirith and Helm's Deep. And it's as if you remember in Helm's Deep, you have the characters Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli. They're on the walls of Helm's Deep, the Deeping Wall, and you see them in hand-to-hand combat with the orcs, pushing back ladders, repelling assaults, while everything is getting more and more desperate. That's just a nail-biting thing about the Helm's Deep fight, and it's really great. And this book does that. You're on the walls with your characters fighting tooth and nail, beating back repellers, siege ladders, siege engines, that kind of stuff. But it's at the scale of a Minas Tirith, a massive freaking multi-walled city, right? So I thought that was really strong. The action was strong. You care enough about the characters to root for them, right? And to grit your teeth when they're failing and when things are going bad and the villains are doing well. But it was as good a battle scene as you can get, I think, without caring more about the characters. In more subdued fighting, like duels or something in a Bernard Cornwell book, right? Even the big fights there, you're more invested with the characters, therefore they're better. But none of it's at a scale of this. This is high fantasy scale, right? So if you're looking for big battles, big sieges, big things like that, you'll get that in this series. I mean, there was a big battle at the end of the second book. I don't remember about the first book, but they're there. So if you want some popcorn fantasy, very low effort on your part to have to learn too much about the world or something, but this will get it done. It's really solid for that purpose. The whole trilogy is really good, but again, we're not in the deep end here with a Lord of the Rings or a Wheel of Time, even, where I'm not the biggest a fan of the Wheel of Time series, having read them all. But it is deeper than this so far, even if I don't like how Robert Jordan wrote. I don't really like his prose too much. It's distinctive. And it's Robert Jordan. With this, if Philip C. Quaintrell wrote something else, would I be able to tell it's Philip C. Quaintrell? I don't know. I don't think so. But popcorn fantasy, if you're into that, if you're into big high fantasy stuff, but not too much of you don't need to invest too much into it, go for this series, this trilogy at least. It's a good time. It's a fun time. Won't take you too long. All right. That's it for this review. Got to go to work. Dirty jacket, dirty boots, early morning. It's work time. On to the next book.